All right, welcome everybody. This is the working group meeting for Istio on August 27th. We have what looks to me like a pretty decently full agenda today, so we'll start it off at the top. Mike, I think I saw you here. You want to walk us through non-uniform waypoints?
Yeah. So it's part of the ambient multi-cluster work. For the alpha version in ambient multi-cluster, we kind of agreed that we will only support uniform setup, like services and their waypoints and all the clusters will be configured the same way. And now we want to lift that restriction. I have a working prototype with all the changes, but given that the changes on the tonal side in particular are relatively large, and given that there is a caveat with cross-cluster load balancer, which is not new, right? The same caveat exists in alpha version. I thought it makes sense to put it on the proposal. So I linked the document there, and I would like to get reviewed and approved. Or if everybody is okay with just reviewing the PRs, I can just skip that and move to the document, move to sending PRs for review.
So let's have a look at the doc here.
Yep. So like the WDS changes is basically currently we have like one field for waypoint in the proto, and instead of that we want to add a mapping that just tells that in this particular cluster you're supposed to use this particular waypoint. So that's basically the change to the schema. Okay, I see a question from John. John?
Yeah, so when we talk about waypoints being non-uniform, are we talking about like they have a different name across different clusters?
Yeah, it's outlined in the document, but basically the types of non-uniformities that we want to support is when waypoints have different names and when one cluster has a waypoint and another cluster doesn't. Those are two types that we want to support.
Why do we care about different? Why would you have different names?
It's just like it comes for free, right? If you support, if you put a map in there, right, we can actually support different names. But in terms of why do we want to support differently named waypoints, I don't know if we want specifically. It's just like the basic idea is each cluster kind of does it independently of each other. Which if you like create the setup organically, you may end up in a situation where one cluster has one waypoint setup and another cluster has a different waypoint setup. But I don't think that we like strictly like want this as a important feature.
Yeah, I guess I just don't really understand the problem. Like I see the solution, but I don't understand the problem that we're trying to solve. Like I don't really get like, so we're saying today you have to have a waypoint in all clusters or no clusters.
Yes, and
what
the same
happens now?
Waypoint.
So let's say I have a waypoint in one cluster and not in the other cluster, and we do the solution. How does the behavior change? We always use the one that has a waypoint.
If we support non-uniform, or are you asking if nowadays the configuration is non-uniform?
No, I mean, what if we do this proposal? What would the behavior be?
Yeah, so basically we pick a cluster, and there is like a section about like how we do that. And if that particular cluster has a waypoint, we will send it. We will route the request to waypoint, and if it doesn't, we won't. We will send it directly to a workload, to a pod. So that's the behavior with this change. The behavior without this change currently, I'm not entirely sure how it will behave, because I'm not entirely sure that it's checking for non-uniformity currently, in the sense that it does emerge of service information from multiple clusters, and we have some merge result. But when we merge in services that are not configured the same way, I'm not entirely sure what this merge result is going to look like, in the sense that is it going to have a waypoint or is it not going to have a waypoint?
Yeah, did we consider an alternative where the remote cluster decides whether to go to the waypoint or not?
You mean like sort of sending it to East-West Gateway, and East-West Gateway just figures out whether to send it to waypoint or not?
Yes, because the East-West Gateway knows, right? Because it knows whether there's a waypoint locally or not.
I think when we send the request, we have to put the waypoint and the identity there. Otherwise, we won't pass. Otherwise, it's not. It may or may not match, depending on where East-West Gateway is going to send the request.
Because the client-side Z tunnel needs to know the identity that it expects on the other end of the inner H1 tunnel,
yeah.
Right?
But you can't have multiple identities.
But we still would need to know waypoint identity, right? So we will have to put something there.
Yes, correct.
Right. So if you say, for example, says that, well, we have one waypoint per cluster and we know what it is, we can put this identity everywhere. But if you don't know what waypoints are there in the cluster or what waypoints a particular service is using, if there's multiple, we don't know what identity to put there.
John, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, it answers it. I have to digest the meaning of the answer, though. I mean, we know about the waypoints in the control plane. So this is more about like it's not about what information we have, because we have all the information. It's just about what information we give to Z-Tunnel, right?
Yes, exactly.
So we could give it the information of the two identities.
Tell it instead of like service identity, a waypoint, and like combine the two and give it in WDS.
Yeah, does WDS and workload actually support multiple, or is it only in a service that you can put multiple?
This proposal is only for the service because we currently cannot even talk directly without a service. That's a sort of limitation of double H bonds. Outer tunnel have to have a domain name for East-West Gateway to route the request correctly.
So to make sure I'm following correctly, in theory, we could send Z-Tunnel both the waypoints and the pod identity and let the East-West Gateway decide, and that way we're good either way if we do decide to delegate. Am I muted? Can you hear me?
No, I can hear you. I think that there's still some sort of I need to think about it. I didn't consider this option, but there's one potential non-uniformity that we still kind of need to support when locally we might or might not have a waypoint. So we kind of need to figure out like what, for this particular service, what other clusters we can send requests to. If we don't provide any information about like where it could be routed, right? Currently, oh well, maybe we have all that information. Yeah, I need to think about it. I will update the document with this alternative. I guess we can move on.
As a part of that, kind of as an aside, we talked last week about the beta checklist for ambient multi-cluster. And we talked about it at the TOC meeting this week. So I'm beginning to ask for TOC either requests for changes or approvals on that checklist. We are already moving forward on trying to close out all the items on the checklist. So if there's anything that's not there that we need to do before launching to beta, we'd like that feedback ideally in the next week. So I've got the link to that there if you don't already have it. And now I can hand it over to Mike and or Keith.
This question topic was just more about, might be a steering question, but do we have any plans for like Istio Day, not Istio Day, sorry, KubeCon North America booth staffing? Has anybody had an update on that? And should we get a sign-up sheet going once we know if we do know the hours?
We do have a full day, a full booth or full-time booth. I'm not sure they've published the schedule yet, but we could probably start a sign up and adjust when the schedule comes out. We roughly know what the schedule is going to be. It doesn't change much from one year to the next.
Okay, so I'll work with Mike then to get that together. And sorry, was there an action item or a request on the non-uniform waypoint proposal? Or Mikhail, are you or Mike? Okay, are you looking for more feedback, or did we finish discussion there? Want to make sure.
I need to follow up on this idea. Instead of like having a mapping from cluster to waypoint, have something similar for identities, so that we can just put all the right identities into the request and let the East-West gateway route it appropriately in the cluster. I don't know how much of a change is it going to be, and I need to look at it before I can evaluate the proposal.
Yeah, one thing as
Gotcha.
well, like on that note, another way to think of it is instead of putting a list of waypoints, you put one waypoint, and that waypoint is a pointer to a service, and that service may have endpoints that only exist on the remote cluster. So we don't necessarily need to like aggregate the identities up into some area. Like the model still works because we can have services that select workloads across clusters, and then waypoints really not anything so special. It's just the second tier of selection.
But that wouldn't necessarily support non-uniform setup, right?
I know it does, because think about if you have no, let's say ignore waypoints, everything, just simple services. I have a service that's deployed in one cluster and not the other cluster. So then I have in WDS, I have one service, and then I have one workload that's in one cluster. So when I call the service, we look at the workloads and say, okay, there's this one workload in this one cluster, so we'll go there. It's the same exact thing if you do a waypoint, right? We say, here's my waypoint. It has one workload in one cluster, so I know about that one. And when I go to resolve the waypoint service, I need to pick a waypoint workload. And to pick the waypoint workload, obviously there's only workloads for clusters where it exists, so we only pick those.
But then how do you support the setup where you have different waypoints, or like one cluster?
I don't think I don't personally think that's a use case, and it didn't sound like you did either. It sounded that was more like if we fix the problem that we do care about, then we also happen to fix this other one. But to me, that's kind of violation of namespace sameness to have different waypoint names across clusters for the same service.
I'm not really following how it violates. And it's like, as far as like customer is concerned, like if user tries to configure something, how do they know that they have to configure like waypoint the same way? Like what is like fundamental principle of how like you're supposed to do it right that will force them to do it this way?
It's the same thing of why do I have to name the same service the same name, right? That's the namespace sameness principle that Istio falls under. The same named services are logically the same thing across clusters even.
I think to Mike's point though, this is one, I don't think this has been documented because multi-cluster is very new. But it does sound like, John, you're making that there is this idea that a waypoint attachment is a service property. And it's not just whether or not the service has a waypoint, but the name of the waypoint that service is attached to. And because that is a property of the service, that must be replicated and fall under the namespace sameness aspect, which is not just the service name, but also this service property, which is the waypoint that service is attached to, must also be consistent across clusters under namespace sameness. Is that correct?
That's what I was saying. Yeah.
Okay.
That makes sense to me in a stable state. I don't see a big use case for customers to indefinitely have differently named waypoints representing different services. But as a transitional state, like say moving from a waypoint per namespace to a waypoint per service model, we would need, if a customer is using multi-cluster, we can't tell them like turn off multi-cluster, then migrate to a waypoint per service, then turn it back on. They need a way to do that live, and that would result in some period of time where different clusters have differently named waypoints, right?
That's a good point.
What is the criteria for the client to choose between them? Like, let's assume that we support the ability to do that in WDS. The client is still addressing the service, right? It has no idea that those two waypoints have different properties.
Yes.
The client will make no distinction between them. Yes, there's the implementations.
Do you mean the client-side zTunnel or the application client?
Either.
So the client-side zTunnel needs to know what identity to expect on the other end of a connection.
Sure, but that's an implementation detail, right? Like let's think in terms of policy and what the client's addressing, right? Like, so let's say we can make all the WDS and zTunnel implementation details work, which is a technical challenge, but not intractable. You've chosen to have two different waypoint implementations, but the client is completely blissfully unaware of this. So that's an implementation detail of the service, right? Just like if I had a flag saying this pod should implement this feature a little differently than that feature, as far as the client is concerned.
Yes.
Right, so that's why, right, from a policy attachment standpoint, namespace sameness does apply. Transitional states and implementation, sure. Right, like you'll run a rolling upgrade of the waypoint. If the waypoint has 3 replicas and it moves to a new version of the proxy, its behavior may vary because you have a newer version of the software. Right, so we handle some of those transitional states already. But I think the fundamental point I think John's trying to make is, regardless of the implementation detail, the property of namespace sameness still applies as far as the client is concerned.
Yes.
One question I just want to make sure to ask so we're all on the same page, because I forgot some of this. When we make the actual request to the east-west gateway in the authority header, is it the service name or the waypoint service name?
In the outer tunnel, it's a service name. The tunnel that east-west gateway terminates, it has the service name.
Okay,
Not
so the
waypoint.
east-west gateway is the one that sees this request is to a service. This service has a waypoint, so go to the waypoint.
Yes,
Okay.
but the inner connect will have the identity of the waypoint in there. So.
But the authority header was to be the same, right? It's still the same service FQDN. The validation context is just different.
I need to double check if they're the same, but maybe, yeah. I think the important part is that we have to give the service name in the outer tunnel. Maybe one question to follow up on this, right? Just to understand this namespace sameness assumption. How, like, in this scenario, how is it differently named waypoints are different from, for example, clusters deciding on their own whether they want to configure a waypoint at all, right? Can't we extend the same logic and say we actually don't want to support non-uniform setups at all, based on the same reasoning?
That was sort of my question about the waypoint attachment being a property of the service. So another way of thinking about it, to your to Louis' question of transitory state, how does the client know? The client doesn't know. It depends. Like the enforcement's happening on the server side, and the policy that gets applied is dependent upon which cluster the traffic ends up getting to. So the client is effectively deferring all policy to wherever the traffic rules go, like whichever pod, whichever destination that the traffic ends up falling to. I sort of think about this as being, again, that transitory state, sort of like original destination, or sorry, socket option reuse port, where there's no, the user that can't really at policy level decide what cluster it goes to today. So if you have multiple different named waypoints with potentially different policy, you might get to one or the other during that transitory state, and that policy of that destination cluster is what's going to be applied. So it's locally consistent, at least.
Well, server-side policy enforcement is always the case with Waypoint, right? It is a server-side proxy.
Correct.
Right. So in the discovery model, right, we assume a certain amount of namespace uniformity. And so like even a transitional state, like I have workloads and waypoint in same cluster, and I bring up workload in other cluster, and I drain out workloads in local cluster. The client would expect to go to the local waypoint. So waypoint existence for a namespace is a global property. It's not that loosely coupled to system.
That's certainly not how we've designed it in this first round.
Sure.
We've said
right.
that the Z tunnel makes the decision for going to the remote cluster or not. And then the remote cluster makes the decision for going through a waypoint or not.
Right. I'm just pointing out that Mike's argument, right? You can create variations of it. The expectation, right? If the service exists in the local cluster, the policies exist in the local cluster, the waypoint exists in the local cluster, and the endpoints do not. Right? You would have a similar argument to make. But the expectation absolutely would be that the policies get enforced. The implementation does not do that.
Yes. That was something that we discussed, I want to say like back in February, March timeframe. And we kind of marked it as like a follow-up item that we'd like to be able to go multi-cluster both before and after hitting a waypoint.
Right. So the proximal assumption is the guidance to users for this version of multi-cluster will be make sure you have consistent deployment of waypoints with the workloads and the services. So everywhere where you have the service and the workload, you have the waypoint. That way, at least, you get consistent behavior.
Yes.
But can we say, can we
I'm just saying, if you want to take on non-uniformity of waypoint deployment models, never mind waypoint implementation models, right? You're gonna have to take on these types of problems.
I'm not sure I completely understand what problem you're describing. Like, if the destination cluster decides what policies applies, what is the problem with that?
So local waypoint with no local endpoints. East-West Gateway is not involved in the policy decision.
So
in this model, it would be the only way to fail over is the Z tunnel has to fail over.
Right.
So there's no, once it hits the local waypoint, it's not going multi-cluster. It's going to traffic.
Right. That's what the implementation does.
Yes.
Right. We can come up with a lot of examples of non-uniform deployment models that don't require varying the waypoint service account.
I think that at least thus far, we've kind of operated on the rule that the destination cluster makes the L7 policy enforcement decisions.
That is what we did. Yes.
So
I'm just saying if you're going to make the argument,
that assumption is not something that we can rely on.
No, I'm saying if you want to take on non-uniformity, waypoints are inconsistently deployed, right? Which is the basic argument. either by granularity or by placement, these problems need to be dealt with.
But like, can we a little bit call out the specific problems? Like, we send it to local waypoint. We don't know what happens behind this waypoint. There might be no workload. The problem is if we don't fail over to another cluster, the request fails. Is that the problem that you described?
Yeah, that would be a common concern, right?
Isn't that a
Yes,
health check problem?
It's
Sorry,
a
go
load
ahead.
balancing and health check problem and a technical problem.
I think it's a problem that exists already even in uniform setup.
Yes, no, it does.
Yeah.
But it can also exist in non-uniform setups. It can come into existence.
Yes. What I'm trying to understand is how this problem, what makes this problem unique for non-uniform setup, and
It's just
why now
another
it's-
example. It's another example of a non-uniform setup. Why is this one more or less important than the other one?
What's another one?
I use different granularity of waypoint deployment, like per service versus per namespace in a different cluster. That's a different type of non-uniformity.
Yeah, but I'm having trouble seeing what the problem is.
No, if you're a user, which of those two use cases do you care more about?
Probably the first one.
We don't have a problem with the second one, though.
Sorry,
Like,
which one is the first one? Which one is the second one? I'm bad at keeping order.
The no endpoints.
Yeah, the no endpoints in local cluster is probably actually more common problem.
Yeah, but that's not specific to non-uniform setups.
Yeah, but it's a runtime example of non-uniformity.
But like, I guess the question here is, are you
So-
saying that we should address that problem before we allow non-uniform setups as described in this document? Is it a question
I
of
want to
priority, or are you
make sure
saying
we
that
have-
they have to be coupled?
I want to make sure we have a roadmap that makes sense. If you're asking to prioritize non-uniform waypoints over solving that other problem, it needs to be justified because they're both quite complicated pieces of work.
So the question is, it's a question of not whether we want to support non-uniform setup as described in this, but in what order.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. I thought somehow one was tied to the other.
So one of the reasons that we haven't tackled waypoint non-uniformity in terms of multi-cluster routing downstream of the waypoint or upstream after the waypoint from the perspective of the client is that it breaks our simple rule. Our simple rule right now is that policy happens on the destination cluster. We
Yes.
can't enforce policy twice.
Mhm.
So if the policy is enforced in the client cluster and then the multi-cluster routing decision is made, we need a way of expressing that complexity to the user so that they understand what policy is applied to what request. And I've not found a simple heuristic for that yet. I'm not saying one doesn't exist, but we would need to pay some attention to that. The last thing you want is unpredictable policy enforcement. Even predictable wrong policy enforcement is probably better
Right.
than unpredictable policy enforcement.
Right. Like I get that the technical solutions to either of these two problems might be wildly different. I suspect that they're not actually that wildly different. But I'm skeptical that non-uniform waypoints is a more important problem to solve.
So I guess
I'm not saying either is invalid. I would just like effort to go to where it's best, right, yielding value for the user.
I guess this conversation moved a little bit towards the better checklist discussion rather than this proposal discussion.
Yeah, that's fine.
Specifically, but okay, I don't have an argument with that. But given that we kind of already have a working solution for non-uniform setup, is there any objection to that?
Yes, I think it's violating the goals of the WDS API to have this per cluster map in there. Right. Like the whole point is to have that service is associated with one waypoint. That waypoint has certain workloads. And I don't know that we even need, it's not clear to me why that is a problem we need to solve necessarily. And it's like very polluting of the goals of the API, and of one of which is to have not having unbounded maps. For example, you have 1,000 clusters, we're gonna have this giant map of 1,000 waypoints. Like, that's problematic. I think it's potentially violating service namespace sameness stuff. I very much don't like the approach.
So John, if instead of a map of cluster to waypoint, we simply had a list of waypoint identities, or sorry, identities that were tolerated when connecting to this service. Some of them might be discrete waypoint identities, others are going to be the regular service identity. Would that, and then the zTunnel just accepts any of those identities on the server side. Oh, but it's not, the zTunnel has to initiate the connection, doesn't it? And pick the identity proactively.
No,
No.
which I think we already have that, where a service, you can just give it a list of sands that
Yeah.
it'll
Okay,
accept.
so would that work for this scenario, or is there an important detail that I'm missing there?
Right, so I'm just trying to understand, like, walking to the far end, the user-facing behavior. If I have non-uniform waypoints, are you saying that they're going to be sent to both of them, or will only send to the ones that match the local one?
It would send to whatever waypoint is in the destination cluster. There could be no waypoints, there could be a namespace waypoint, there could be a service waypoint. It depends on what cluster you land on. That cluster decides what waypoint you choose.
Yeah, the problem is we need, so how I was envisioning it work is, so we get a service. The service has one waypoint associated with it. And that's a service, so it's a grouping of workloads. And that grouping has a bunch of workloads, which could be in local or remote clusters. And it doesn't have to be in all the clusters, but it could be in some of them. Now, if those were differently named, they wouldn't be a part of that group, right? So they wouldn't show up. So if you had a mismatched name, it wouldn't show up in what I'm proposing.
So John, I think, like, leaving aside waypoint, right? We already tolerate identity variance within service, right? Like pure.
It's not really within a service. It's within workloads within the service.
Yes, no, that's what I mean. Like, the workloads can have varying service accounts.
But it's different, because what we're saying here is I don't care about the service counts. The service counts is 100% fine. My concern is with the different services to represent the same thing, right? We don't merge foo and bar services and then allow you to call them with one name in the local cluster, right? You have to have them name the same thing.
Well, so I think what we're saying is, right, or Mitch, your argument is make this more loosely coupled than tightly coupled.
Yes.
Right, so we're going to try and talk to waypoint for service across the east-west gateway boundary.
I get that, but how are you going to represent that? Because we represent a waypoint by its service.
And then
That
if you start
decision is
sharing,
made by the east-west gateway.
Yeah,
The
but you
east-west
don't know
gateway
you don't know which gateways to send to, right? Like, I get, I
That's the
100%
change.
agree. If you got to the east-west gateway, then you would be fine. But if we're doing, if we're like, we wouldn't know to send there.
What
That's
maybe
the
I'm-
WDS change, John. Like that's the purpose of the map. So instead of just doing a lookup based on the waypoint name, we're doing a lookup for, I guess, all of the waypoints for a particular service, and then saying we could send to either of any of them, is my understanding.
Yes.
So, I mean, I guess the discussion here is then, is the way that we're representing the waypoint state behind the east-west gateway the right model? We obviously don't need to send all the specific identities if we're going through the east-west gateways. Should we delegate the resolution of waypoint for service lookup to the east-west gateway rather than performing it in the local zTunnel?
But you do need the identities because you want to do that.
Yeah, no, so you need to have the identities, but we already handle identity variance for destination.
Right. Yeah.
We could even.
I think John's question is more
potentially have-
fundamental than that.
We could even have the waypoint respond within the outer H-bone tunnel with information about, the east-west gateway respond within the outer H-bone tunnel, any information that the client needs to have about a waypoint or not, or a non-waypoint.
I don't think the client actually needs to. Right, that the information the client needs is there's a waypoint for this service behind this east-west gateway. That's all it actually technically needs to know. Maybe capacity and load, right? for load balancing purposes. Is there any other piece of
I don't-
information technically required?
The identity of the waypoint.
Yeah, so we need the identity to authorize,
Okay, yeah.
which we're already used to handling that problem, right? And we don't need large maps to represent the state of there's a way, like we need a flag to say there's a waypoint for this service behind this east-west gateway.
So it's still going to be a mapping that from network to whether there is a waypoint behind that east-west gateway.
Yes, there's still a two-level lookup for sure, but it's not replicating nearly as much state because the mapping is now, there's now a two-level mapping occurring, right? zTunnel says, I want to talk to the waypoint behind you, east-west gateway, for this service. East-west gateway says, okay, I'm going to resolve that for you and route your traffic. zTunnel does not have to know, other than the identity, any more information. It certainly doesn't need to know endpoint.
And this
I think-
approach itself doesn't really know the endpoint, but
Right now, I think it's a map of waypoint name or identity to gateway address.
it's a
And gateway
map
address
from-
is a,
map
Go
from
ahead.
cluster to a gateway address, which is a representation of waypoint, will typically be a VIP or something.
so this map
Yeah,
has
so-
one entry per cluster, right?
Only for those clusters where you have a waypoint.
Right. And Louis, you said it would be a map of east-west gateway to waypoint identity. That would still, east-west gateways are effectively one-to-one with clusters, right?
Mhm.
So it doesn't seem like that changes the cardinality, which was John's concern, as I understand it.
I'm wondering,
John has a question about waypoints for a global service. We don't always make waypoint for a global service, but like we kind of have to if it's a waypoint for a global service. Otherwise, it's not going to be reachable, right? It doesn't happen automatically. And we have to label it manually, but for multi-cluster communication to work, if a global service has a waypoint, we have to mark waypoint as well currently as global service. Does that answer the question?
yeah, John, is your concern about inlining here?
I mean, so the whole point of the waypoint and the gateway address stuff is that it's a lookup. It's a pointer to the information we need. And so I'm pretty worried about that. Like we've tried multiple times to flatten these things out, and every single time afterwards we've thought it through more and realized that was a bad idea, and keeping it as this pointer that we traverse, like kind of this reference tree, was a lot cleaner of a model. So I'm kind of worried about diverging from that.
But it's still two-level lookup, right? It's just they look up different things in different clusters.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's definitely going to have to be like we need. Yes, it is the two-level lookup. That's how it works even in single cluster, right?
Except that we assume that waypoint itself is a global service. So if you say have a service that is global and we check that it has a waypoint, we abandon all the endpoints of the service itself and start resolving the waypoint endpoints.
So if, John, just thinking about the schema here, we could obviously create independent service resources for each of the services behind the east-west gateway, which would be independently updated. We would have to mark this with network, right, to unflatten this. Right, so we would end up creating services now would be keyed just but not by name, namespace, and host name, but also by network or cluster. And then gateway addresses are effectively logical containers of services across the network boundary.
Yeah, I think I need to digest this a bit and look at in the actual code how things work and how things are mapped through.
By actual code, you mean the current state or the changes?
No, the current state. Like go deploy the setup and see what we're generating to make sure fully understanding.
It might also imply some split in WGS between service and service policy to avoid redistributing that state. So I think we agree with I think we all have a rough idea what the logical mapping is. Obviously, the actual mapping is really, really important from a scale standpoint. If we want the presence of service in other clusters to be mapped through their east-west gateway keying, that can't be flattened into the service resource, especially at scale. We need to find a different way to map it. Or at least we need to test at scale that the churn rates are low enough. Like let's say an east-west gateway gets rescheduled, what would that do?
When you say rescheduled, you're talking like a single instance moved from one node to another with presumably some sort of outage.
Right, its address changed.
In the intervening time.
This map would have to update because it's inlined. The entire resource has to update. Right? That cascades pretty brutally.
So
that means every service has to update.
It seems like what we want is not so much the address, but the identity. Mm-hmm. The identity is, as far as I understand it, the bare minimum of information that the client must have. The east-west gateway can make the address decision. Yes?
Hold on, but Louis, in that scenario, that happens anyway with waypoint VIP changing, network address changing, like the network gateway address changing. That's already a property of the WDS, as I understand it.
Yes, but it shouldn't affect service.
Well, it will affect service if gateway, if waypoint address changes, right?
Sorry, the waypoint, but in the same cluster, right? The local one. Like it's okay for local changes to have local effects on local services. Right?
What about single network? Like if you're in a single network environment, I would expect this to be consistent. Is that just a different?
Yeah, flat network, right? Is flat network, right? It's like it's logically one cluster.
Okay. So you're saying for in a segmented world, we're in multi-network. We need to persist the property that a change in one cluster does not ripple throughout all other clusters, like all other services for scale.
Right. In potentially destructive manners. Yes.
Got it. So what we want then is not necessarily, like you said, the gate, or like Mitch said, the gateway address. What we're wanting is the logical name of the east-west gateway.
Is waypoint. It's called gateway address, but it's waypoint.
Oh, yes, sorry. Of the waypoint. Yeah, the logical name. Yes.
Yes.
Similar to how workloads have service name, we would need to have sort of waypoint name essentially.
So I want to do a quick time check. We have 10 minutes left, and as much as I'm enjoying this conversation, we do have a few other items on the agenda. Do we want to continue this conversation and move the other items to next week, or do we want to try to have a look at them now?
We should give them some airing. There's obviously a lot of detail right here. We're not going to get through it in this meeting, so I think we should. But there's been a lot of feedback, so I think it's probably worthwhile if people take a little time to think it through, and then come back to it. It's a very deep technical subject.
In that case, Keith, did you have more to say on the topic of the Istio booth at KubeCon?
Nope. I'll follow up with steering. Thanks.
Sounds good. Mike, Gateway API versioning.
Okay, I joined in time for my topic. Yeah, this was something where I saw that we're currently similar to how Istio for many years read like the V1 Alpha 3 Istio APIs. For Gateway API, we're still reading the V1 Beta 1 APIs for the resources for which those existed during like when the standard channel was first created with some of those. Since then, those resources have graduated to V1, and I was curious if we plan to basically resurrect this PR and start reading the V1 ones, which would be a breaking change for any users who are still using the V1 Beta 1 resources. But I saw that we moved to reading a bunch of V1 Istio resources 6 months or so ago. And this feels like a similar change that we might want to just do ahead of potentially any chance that this gets removed in some future Gateway API release.
So two comments. One, it sounds the same, but it's actually radically different because with the Istio Gate CRDs, we install the CRDs as part of the install. So you have to do something really dumb to not get the CRDs. But these are separate, and so you don't have to do something that wrong. You just have to not touch your Gateway API CRDs for, I don't know what it's been now, a year and a half, 2 years. So I'm not against it, but it's not. It's much higher risk for sure. The other thing you said, I also thought was slightly wrong. What was it? Oh, about beta being removed. Rob has assured me they won't remove it. I don't know if he's telling the truth. He's not the only one that makes decisions on the project, but that is what he said. If they do, we would be in quite a pickle for sure. So I'm actually kind of mostly in favor of it, but yeah,
What does
it
the
has been quite a
migration
while.
story look like? Like, is it, if I'm on 127 and V1 Beta 1 today, do I have to upgrade both at the same time, 128 and V1 simultaneously to get things to work?
No. So here's what happens. At some point between when V1 came out, which was, I don't know how long, let's say a year ago, and before you upgrade to 128, you have to install the new CRDs. You don't have to change any config. You just reinstall the CRDs at the newer version. At that point, there's no risk of doing that. I mean, you can start using new fields, I suppose, but it's not like a, migration. You don't have to change your CI/CD pipelines. They can still use V1 Beta 1. Nothing there changes at all. If you don't do that, you upgrade to Istio, your Istio D 1.28 comes up, it will not ever get marked as ready. And then you'll look at the logs and it'll be like, hey, we're trying to read this thing. It doesn't exist. What's going on?
So there's no consequence to upgrading early, but there is a consequence to upgrading late, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and the consequence is more, it's pretty obvious. Like, it's not like a subtle breakage. Like Istio D won't start, which if you're hands-on, it's fine. Like, you'll probably notice it. A case where a similar issue was quite problematic for us was when the control plane was being upgraded on behalf of someone else, in which case it being upgraded and then just never coming up is a concern, to say the least.
Did it not mark itself as ready?
Yeah, exactly, which is the desired behavior.
Okay, great. Even if you're upgrading on behalf of somebody else at that point, like, I feel like that's your responsibility to monitor that the pods you told to run do.
So Keith asked the other, I guess, relevant question here is, what is the downside of just reading them forever? Yes, we do deprecate things, but
yeah, there's very little downside, assuming that kind of the verbal conversations that we've had with Rob hold. I'd link to there is like written guidance on how these APIs might potentially be eventually removed, and it's much easier if we do that in Istio before that happens in the upstream, because basically for the reasons John was describing, like, it's easier to upgrade early than to be stuck in a position where they suddenly aren't available. But there's currently very little downside to keeping them, particularly because we're doing things with like aliasing, where new things still are readable in the newest version of the V1 Beta 1 CRDs, because Kubernetes versioning is weird.
So, like, we can give users tools to protect themselves from that eventuality, right? Like, they could have something in the Istio config that says, don't allow the beta APIs, right?
No, so,
So they-
like our code has to read one or the other. Yeah.
Yeah.
Setting aside options that are highly complicated.
But like we can choose to make our code can read one or the other.
Yeah.
But it can choose to fail when it, right. Like we can choose the failure mode, or the user can choose the failure mode.
So like, yeah, at compile time, we can either support one or the other, not at runtime.
Mhm.
And then our only two options if the API doesn't exist is either don't start up or start up and ignore all their rules, which I would favor the first one.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's not so bad. Like they start up, it doesn't work. They go, what the hell? And they finally read the release notes that they skipped, or run the pre-check tool that they post-check is probably a better name for most users. And then it says, oh, you're using the old CRD, which we already have tooling to detect, by the way. We just need to change it. It was just for alpha to beta transition. Now it'd be for beta to V1 and simple fix. So I'm not terribly against doing this.
It's currently a non-issue. It's basically like if at some point we want to do this during the next like 2 or 3 releases, for the eventuality that like maybe 2 years from now this is no longer available.
Yeah, and the thing is, like a year ago, like we could have done this as well, but it's like at that point, people probably hadn't naturally gone to V1.
Yes.
But at this point, how many people are using new versions of Istio with like 2-year-old versions of Gateway API? Hopefully not super likely.
That's probably kind of like the minimum framework we should look at is like Gateway API's like 2-year support window, and like when that drops off the version before the V1 was available, then like maybe we consider it at that point in an Istio version.
Realistically, whether they're doing in-place or revision-based upgrades, this seems like it would be a non-breaking change. Revision-based, their new revision just never comes up, which is fine because they've got no data planes relying on the new revision until they try to cut over. In place, they're updating a deployment in place. The old replicas are never torn down because the new replicas never marked themselves as ready. So it sounds pretty good.
Yeah, it's a breaking change in the sense that actions required on the part of the user, but it's not breaking in the sense that functionality will be impaired. It'll be an obvious breakage.
Yeah, you'd have to do something weird to make it actually affect your mesh.
Correct. Yes.
Like uninstall and install.
Yeah, I mean, that'll break your mesh no matter what. So,
Well, it won't if you just do it with Istio, at least for a brief period. Not that we recommend it. So
yeah,
I guess the minimum action at this point, Mike, is probably just put something in the release notes warning users that at some point in the indeterminate future, this will happen.
leave it
Yeah,
there.
I think we
I think we
Same
might have
thing.
already done that in the Istio code
Yeah,
pre-check tool. I think
Yeah,
we
did
did.
we?
Or at least Mike, you and I on some thread had said we should do this. I don't know if we actually ended up doing it.
I know that we did a similar thing for the V1 ones. So yeah, we should probably do this if it that language makes sense. That seems sufficient for now.
All right. I think we are about at time. Jackie, I'm sorry we didn't get to your topic. Hopefully we'll be able to bump that up to the top of the list for next week.
Oh yeah, totally fine. I guess quickly, I'm just curious how much appetite there is for supporting port exclusion in ambient. So that's just the high level kind of feedback I'd like.
I would prefer to solve the active versus the health checking approach. In general, it's more general. I've been trying to think about other cases where we have endpoints being reported into services where the presumption of endpoint health that we make is less reliable. The SQL Server one is a pretty good example, but I think there are others.
Like just general racing and trying multiple endpoints at the same time. You'd get the TCP connection for the first, and yeah.
Yes. That seems like a more generally useful solution.
I guess I'm trying to find a solution that doesn't involve requiring a waypoint for more,
Yeah, no, I think
complex
these.
behavior, but I don't know if the place for this behavior or heuristic belongs in Z-tunnel.
Well, besides that, I don't know that Envoy, even if we add this to Z-tunnel, I don't know that Envoy supports this sort of racing, health checking, DNS functionality today.
The equivalent in Envoy would be non-passive, would be active health checking.
Right, but Istio doesn't do that today.
Sure, but like we're not trying to solve every problem.
My point is, if we solve it in Z-tunnel, we have it working for Z-tunnel. The second you have a waypoint, now you're broken again.
Is that a problem? Right. Mostly this occurs in services where, right, that are kind of unique. Right. We're not trying to solve every problem right now.
So basically, we're saying, because that's fair. Okay, so not HTTP, not. Okay, I can buy that. Non-by filter. Okay, yeah, I can buy that. So we're fine with waypoints being broken. You're just solving it in Z-tunnel in theory.
Yeah, I thought I haven't checked. Obviously for non-HTTP backends, does Envoy support a connection or like a simple can I connect style health check to a TCP backend as an active health check? That would be the logical equivalent.
Yeah, Envoy supports active health checking, and with strict DNS, it puts all DNS endpoints into a cluster. So if you turn on active health checking for that cluster, then I guess that would get you pretty much what you want because the DNS is asynchronous.
Yeah, I would have thought so.
Okay, fair. Okay. I don't know that we could have like different semantics like Jackie's got in her doc, but that initial active health check plus strict DNS might be sufficient for the use cases that we're wanting to solve.
Yeah, I mean, I think like we just had this presumption, right? If there's an endpoint in a cluster, we assume it's healthy, right? Because hey, it came from Kubernetes and Kubernetes health checks pods and blah blah blah, right? Which doesn't hold for other things, obviously. And so we could be pessimistic instead of optimistic. Being pessimistic comes with a performance overhead of like, hey, we have to try a bunch of connections and do a bunch of stuff. But it's more general.
Okay. Okay, that makes more sense now. I'll think more on that. I can add that. I can kind of.
Yeah, and feel free to ping in Slack, Jackie.
Sure.
You want to go through that more?
Okay, awesome. Thanks. Sorry.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. Jackie, I've got you at the top of the agenda for next week too, so that we can, since we didn't give you much time this week.
Perfect.
And we'll see you then.
Great. Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye, folks.